When I was 15, I lived in a small, quiet house on the outskirts of town. Everything around me felt calm, like the world was moving at a slower pace. The trees swayed gently in the wind, the birds chirped in the early mornings, and the distant hum of cars on the main road was the only sign of life beyond our little street. Yet, despite all the calm and serenity, there was something unsettling. It was something I couldn't explain, not then, and even now, the memory still haunts me. It was the house across the street, the faded blue one that looked like it had been abandoned for years. The house was always so still. The windows were covered with dark, thick curtains, and the door was shut tight, as if it was hiding from the world. No lights flickered from inside, no sounds of movement. No one ever came or went. The place felt frozen in time. But what made it even stranger was the old man who lived there. My parents always spoke about him with a tone of indifference, as if his presence barely mattered. They said he was just a reclusive, lonely man, peculiar, but harmless. But deep down, I always felt like something was wrong. There was an eerie stillness about the place. And then, there was the hand. I couldn't forget that hand. Every evening, as I sat by my window doing homework or reading a book, I would see it, a slender, pale hand that would appear from behind the drawn curtains of the blue house, waving gently as though it were trying to get my attention. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, or maybe a random occurrence. But it happened every evening, at the same time, without fail. I began to feel a sense of unease settle in my chest. How could he know when I was looking? I couldn't help but feel like it wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't just a wave, it felt deliberate, as though the hand knew I was watching. The first few times, I brushed it off as nothing more than my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just seeing things. But then it happened again. And again. That hand would appear at the exact moment I looked out my window, waving softly, almost as though it were expecting me to notice. I tried to convince myself that it was just chance. After all, it could just be a random wave from an old man who wanted to acknowledge that someone was around. But deep inside, a voice in my mind kept whispering, something is wrong here. This is not normal. My curiosity, or perhaps my growing fear, got the best of me. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon and the sky turned to dusky shades of purple and orange, I decided to test it. I turned off all the lights in my room and slowly pulled the curtain just enough to peek through. I sat perfectly still, my heart racing, waiting, watching. It felt like the longest moment of my life. My eyes were fixed on that window, on the shadow of the old house across the street. And then it happened. That hand, pale and thin, emerged from behind the curtains and waved. This time, though, it was different. It wasn't a simple wave. The hand seemed to be waiting for me. It waved in slow, deliberate movements, as if it had been poised to do so the moment I looked up. My heart thudded in my chest, pounding like it was trying to escape. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, my blood turning to ice. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't tear my eyes away from that hand. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what. How did he know I was watching? I asked myself. How could he know to wave at the exact moment I looked out? The feeling of being watched was overpowering. I felt like there was someone or something on the other side, staring back at me with an intense, knowing gaze. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of that hand. Was it just my imagination? Or was there something more sinister going on? The air in my room felt thick, suffocating. I tossed and turned, unable to escape the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was lurking just outside my window. And then I heard it, the faintest sound of a knock. Light, soft, almost imperceptible, but there. The knock came from outside my window, as if someone had tapped their fingers gently on the glass. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I thought I might suffocate from the sheer fear that gripped me. The next morning, when the sun was up and the light poured into my room, I tried to brush it all off. But the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Then, a few days later, it happened again. This time, I woke up to a strange sight: a yellowed piece of paper stuck to my window. My fingers trembled as I peeled it off the glass, and I read the message scrawled in uneven handwriting: "It's good to see you again." My blood ran cold. No one in my house had heard anything the night before. It couldn't have been a prank. No one else was around, and no one else could have known I was watching. I felt my stomach churn with dread. This wasn't just a coincidence anymore. It was a warning. A message meant for me. For the next several nights, I refused to look out the window. I kept the curtains drawn tight, the lights off, the house as still as possible. But no matter what I did, no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the feeling never went away. I still felt eyes on me. Watching. Waiting. Every time I closed my eyes, I could almost hear that faint knocking, that soft tapping at my window, like a silent invitation to look again. And I knew, deep down, that if I looked again, it would only get worse. Then, one night, I dared to glance out the window, just once. And there it was. A chair, placed directly in front of my window. The old, creaky wooden chair was positioned perfectly, facing my room, as if it were waiting for me to look. And on the glass, another note: "Wave back." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. My body went cold. I knew I couldn't do it. I couldn't play this twisted game anymore. But that fear, the paralyzing, all-consuming fear, kept me frozen in place. The chair, the note, everything, it was all too much. I knew I had to leave, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something would follow me, that the eyes watching me from across the street would never truly disappear. The very next morning, I packed up everything I could, the terror driving my every move. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. As I glanced one final time at the blue house across the street, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was no longer a chair. No waving hand. Instead, there was a mirror placed directly in front of the window, reflecting my own room. My own face. The reflection stared back at me, and for the first time, I understood the horror. He wasn't just watching me. He was trying to make me watch myself. And that, I realized, was the true terror. I moved out that day, never looking back. Just recently, I asked my mom about the old man. She said he'd vanished years ago, that no one had seen him for a long time. I didn't speak any further. I couldn't. What could I say? The memories still haunt me, like a shadow that refuses to leave. To anyone who might find themselves in a situation like mine, listen closely. If you ever see a hand wave from across the street, don't look back. Don't engage. Don't even think about it. The moment you make contact, you'll realize too late that there's something much darker than you can comprehend, waiting to pull you into its world. It all began when the old man moved into the house just 2 doors down from ours. He wasn't someone you'd easily forget. His face, weathered with years of solitude, was marked by deep lines, as though time had carved him into a figure who had lived alone for far too long. His eyes were the worst part: dark, hollow, almost lifeless, as if they had seen too much, or perhaps too little. They had that empty look of someone who had been untouched by the world for too many years. His presence alone felt unsettling, like a ghost drifting into the wrong reality. When he moved in, my father, always eager to help, rushed over to offer his assistance, carrying boxes and furniture into the man's house. I remember watching him from the window as he helped the old man settle in. I didn't think much of it then, but my mother, she didn't like him. She would occasionally mutter something under her breath, something about staying away from strange people, but my father brushed it off, saying the man was just quiet and reserved. Nothing to be concerned about. I didn't know then, but I should have listened to my mother's instincts. A few days later, my father came home, his mood unusually heavy. He was silent, absent-minded, and I could tell something was wrong. Normally, he was talkative, especially after helping someone, but not this time. He barely touched his dinner that night, his eyes sunken with exhaustion, as if a weight had been placed upon him that he couldn't shake. I felt it, too. There was something off about him, something I couldn't put into words, something that made my heart race in unease. Later that night, while I was standing in the bathroom brushing my teeth, I saw him through the window. My father, slipping quietly outside as if trying not to wake anyone, his footsteps soft against the gravel. A few minutes later, he returned, his hands clutching something in the mailbox, his face ashen, like he had seen a ghost. The air was thick with the unspoken words hanging between us. I didn't know it then, but that was when everything started to change. We never spoke of it aloud, but I couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that gnawed at me. The next night, I happened to glance at the mailbox and saw a wrapped package inside. My heart skipped. It was wrapped in old, yellowing paper, and its contents felt heavy, like raw meat. I couldn't bring myself to open it. I didn't know who would send such a thing or why. It was unsettling, more than just odd. It was unnatural. My father didn't speak of it. He didn't tell my mother or me where it came from or who left it. His face, however, betrayed a deeper fear than I had ever seen before. His eyes, usually steady and kind, had a haunted look. It was clear that whatever was happening, whatever he was involved in, was pulling him further and further away from us. Each night, after that first mysterious delivery, the same thing happened. The mailbox was always filled with more of the same. Raw meat, wrapped tightly in paper, no note, no explanation. Nothing. The first time, my mother dismissed it as some sort of strange joke. She laughed, trying to make light of it, but I could see it in her eyes she was uneasy. And I wasn't the only one who felt it. The weight of it all seemed to weigh heavily on my father. He became quieter, more distant. The man who once spent his evenings telling stories and making us laugh now sat in silence, lost in his own thoughts. I watched him closely. He stopped talking to the neighbor altogether. There were no friendly exchanges, no more visits next door. It was like he was avoiding him, as if he feared the man. Every night, like clockwork, my father would leave the house at exactly 4 a.m., his face as empty and vacant as the house across the street. He would return shortly afterward, and his eyes would be hollow. There was something about his expression that made my blood run cold. It was as if he had witnessed something he couldn't unsee, something that had changed him in ways I couldn't understand. And each time, he would act like nothing was wrong, like everything was normal. But I could see it. The fear was there, behind his eyes. One night, I woke up earlier than usual, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had witnessed. The house was still and quiet, but I heard the familiar creak of the front door opening. I rushed to the window, my heart pounding in my chest. My father was leaving again, slipping into the dark like a shadow. I turned away, my thoughts racing. What was he doing? Where was he going? And more importantly, what was happening to him? When I returned to the living room, something caught my eye. In the mailbox was another piece of paper. I grabbed it, my hands trembling, and read the words scrawled across it, "You've taken it twice. Now it's your turn to give it away." The words seemed to echo in my mind. I could feel the chill that came over me, like a wave of ice-cold water flooding my veins. What had my father done? What had he been involved in that was now asking him to give something away? And why? The fear I felt in that moment, an almost primal fear, was like nothing I had ever experienced. It was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. I wanted to scream, to ask my father what was going on, but I couldn't. He never said a word. He only left. That day, I noticed something was different about him. His shoulders seemed lighter, and his eyes weren't as burdened. For a brief moment, it felt like the weight had lifted from him. But that was the moment I realized, we were no longer in control. We had crossed a line that couldn't be undone, and whatever had happened in that house, whatever dark force my father had engaged with, had now consumed him. The next few days were a blur. My mind raced, but everything felt slow, as if the world was moving around me and I was stuck in a moment I couldn't escape. The mailbox continued to deliver its strange packages, the raw meat still arriving every night, each one wrapped in the same old paper. But there were no more notes. There were no more words. It was like we had reached the end of the line. And I knew, deep down, that whatever my father had done, whatever deal he had made, was now settled. It was no longer just about raw meat. It was about something far darker. The day I left, I couldn't look back. I couldn't bring myself to face my father again. I left the house behind, packed my things, and never returned. He stayed there, in that house, with whatever it was that had changed him, and I never saw him again. The silence in that house is something I still hear in my nightmares. The feeling of something watching, something lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. The truth is, once you've stepped into the world of the unknown, once you've accepted something like that into your life, you can never escape it. To those who may one day find themselves in a similar situation, I offer this warning: be careful of what you allow into your life, of what you might take for granted. If you ever receive something from a stranger, no matter how innocuous it may seem, beware. What you take, you may one day have to give back. And when that time comes, you may wish you never opened the door at all.